Tinder horror, exposing his secret, creepy life. Today, we delve into another chilling case. If you find this content intriguing, please support my channel by subscribing and turning on notifications. Often, the most dangerous manipulators possess a disturbing eloquence and charm, skillfully lulling their victims' vigilance, intimidating them, and subjugating them completely. Such relationships pose a severe threat to both mental and physical well-being. Typically, manipulators target vibrant individuals brimming with life, ambition, and energy. Thus, even the most intelligent, strong, and independent people can fall prey to their schemes, ultimately transforming into submissive and silent puppets. Our focus today is on a notorious figure dubbed the Australian Tinder stalker by the media. He preyed on young, successful women, initially enchanting them with his charisma, intelligence, and looks, before spiraling their lives into nightmares. His real name was Paul Lambert, a man who was as charismatic and intelligent as he was deranged. Lambert pursued his victims with a terrifying zeal, resorting to torture, intimidation, and maiming, with lethal intentions only thwarted by a fatal gunshot. Let's take a closer look at Paul Lambert's early life. Paul Lambert, originally named Scales, was born on August 10, 1980 in Brisbane, the bustling capital city of Queensland, Australia. He was the younger of two siblings raised alongside his older sister Dorothy by their parents, Margaret and Oliver Scales. The family dynamic shifted dramatically when Paul was just under 5 years old, as his parents divorced. His father left, cutting off most communication with his children, except for occasional birthday or Christmas greetings, despite providing financial support. This abandonment deeply affected Paul, leaving him harboring intense resentment towards his father, whom he felt had stopped loving him and his sister. By the time he reached junior high, Paul's behavioral and disciplinary issues became pronounced. He was nearly uncontrollable, aggressive towards peers, and defiant of any authority, characterized by impulsivity, irritability, and wildly fluctuating moods. Margaret, deeply concerned about her son's escalating issues, sought professional help and took Paul to a child psychologist. The specialist diagnosed him with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, attributing the condition to the emotional fallout from his parents' divorce. The psychologist believed that Paul's intense reaction to his father's departure was manifesting as behavioral problems and concentration difficulties. At that time, no medication was prescribed. The psychologist was optimistic that Paul would naturally overcome his neurological behavioral issues as he grew. However, contrary to expectations, Paul's condition deteriorated. By age 10, his behavior had become increasingly aggressive and unpredictable. Margaret, desperate for a solution, consulted a psychiatrist who provided a more comprehensive diagnosis. Paul was not only suffering from ADHD, but was also displaying symptoms of bipolar disorder and dissociative identity disorder, DID, previously known as multiple personality disorder. This condition fragmented his identity, suggesting the presence of multiple distinct personalities within him. The psychiatrist prescribed receptor medications, which Paul was to take under his mother's vigilant supervision. Yet, ensuring Paul took his medication proved to be an arduous task. He resisted, firmly believing he was perfectly healthy. Despite these challenges, managing Paul's condition was somewhat more manageable during his childhood, thanks to Margaret's persistence with his treatment, which appeared to temporarily alleviate the symptoms. Remarkably, Paul's mental health struggles did not impede his intellectual or academic performance. He thrived academically, particularly excelling in the sciences and effortlessly performing complex calculations, which impressed his teachers. They saw in him a promising future in a scientific career. After high school, Paul pursued higher education with ease, eventually obtaining a master's degree in economics and finance from a prestigious Australian university. After obtaining his master's degree, Paul landed a prestigious job at the headquarters of a leading company in Sydney, where he quickly ascended to head the finance department. Beyond his professional success, Paul was strikingly handsome from a young age, a trait that only magnified with time. His masculine features, large expressive eyes, and robust physique often made a memorable first impression. During his school days, Paul was quite popular, with many admirers eager for his attention. He was the quintessential social butterfly, often the center of attention at social gatherings. Interestingly, his mental health challenges seemed to contribute to an enigmatic charisma that made him widely regarded as a good, reliable person, especially among his colleagues. This perception was further cemented when he spearheaded a fundraising campaign for a co-worker's child diagnosed with cancer, offering substantial support to the family. Paul was adept at forming friendships and initiating romantic relationships, but these were typically fleeting. His relationships with women revealed a darker side, as his initial charm would soon give way to a more sinister demeanor, ultimately driving his partners away. His romantic entanglements rarely lasted more than a few months before he turned manipulative, stalking, threatening, and weaving elaborate lies that preyed on their emotions, thus instilling deep-seated fear. His choice in partners was telling. He always opted for women who were as physically attractive as he was, perhaps to mirror his own model-like appearance. One of his manipulation tactics was to elicit sympathy by falsely claiming he or his loved ones were terminally ill, guilt-tripping his partners into staying. The true extent of Paul's nature was only really understood by his mother and sister. While manageable as a youth under his mother's strict supervision and therapy, as an adult, he shunned all forms of treatment and psychiatric help. He resorted to blackmail and threats to achieve his objectives, with threats of suicide being his most drastic and effective manipulation tool. From 2002 to 2016, Paul had 6 restraining orders filed against him by different ex-girlfriends, each order a testament to the prolonged stalking and emotional torment he inflicted, driving them to utter despair. In one extreme case, his relentless pursuit forced one of his victims to immigrate to another continent. However, his presence there was short-lived, as he was deported and permanently banned from re-entering the country after she reported his menacing behavior to the police. Let's unpack this story, starting from the beginning. Paul's first. During his time at university, Paul met Samantha. They embarked on a romantic relationship, but it was fraught with control and manipulation. Paul attempted to dictate Samantha's every action, gradually eroding her independence. Their tumultuous relationship ended after graduation, when geographical separation took its toll. Samantha remained in Queensland, while Paul moved to Sydney for career opportunities. Despite the breakup, the emotional connection lingered, and they maintained contact. In the flush of their first love, Samantha hesitated to cut ties completely. They continued to communicate occasionally through calls, messages, and social media interaction. Unbeknownst to Samantha, Paul was involved with other women, yet he consistently messaged her, professing his enduring affection and claiming he had not met anyone superior to her. This was, predictably, a manipulative tactic. Despite her prior unsettling experiences, Samantha believed that time had mellowed him and that his feelings were genuine. The narrative takes a more serious turn in January 2014, nearly a decade after their initial breakup. Rekindling their old flame, the couple resumed their relationship. Just a month later, Paul proposed, and an elated Samantha accepted. They married on March 2nd of that year. However, the initial bliss was short-lived. Within weeks, Paul's behavior took a dark turn. He struggled to control his emotions, and trivial matters easily triggered him. He exerted incessant emotional pressure on Samantha, trying to dominate her will. When emotional manipulation failed, he resorted to physical violence. Desperate, Samantha considered leaving. Paul promised reform, pledging to seek specialist help, an assurance that proved to be yet another manipulative ploy. 6 months into their marriage, as tensions escalated to an unbearable level, Samantha revisited the idea of divorce. This time, despite Paul's promises to seek help, Samantha's trust had eroded beyond repair. In a last-ditch effort, Paul proposed a trip to reassess their relationship and emotions. Surprisingly, Samantha saw a glimmer of hope in this proposal and agreed to the journey. In late September 2014, they embarked on a trip across the globe to the United States. Paul was adamant about visiting Florida, a destination he had long been eager to explore, although Samantha's preference leaned towards Hawaii. Eventually, she relented to her husband's persistent persuasion. While in Florida, they renewed their wedding vows on the picturesque shores of the Atlantic Ocean. Despite the ostensibly romantic gesture, the trip did little to mend their fractured marriage. Upon returning to Australia, Paul's fixation on Florida deepened. He proposed relocating there permanently. Enchanted by his experiences, Samantha, however, was resolute against moving abroad and continuing their tumultuous relationship. She demanded a divorce, but Paul flatly refused. Driven by his obsession, Paul abruptly left Samantha, resigning from his lucrative job and relocating to Florida. Samantha pursued an official divorce, but Paul disregarded her efforts. Financially buoyed by substantial savings from his tenure at a major company, Paul swiftly adapted to his new life in the U.S. He rented a luxurious apartment, frequented the gym, invested in trendy, expensive clothing, and meticulously maintained his appearance, capturing the attention of many women. Despite the interest he attracted, Paul was selectively engaging, holding out for a particular connection. He created profiles on various dating sites displaying his most flattering photos, which quickly drew numerous admirers. Yet, he responded selectively, waiting for a standout profile. That moment came when he discovered Brittany Ann Kill, a 32-year-old local news anchor with a quintessential Hollywood look. Brittany immediately caught his eye, prompting Paul to initiate contact by suggesting they meet, a new chapter in his relentless pursuit. Brittany eagerly agreed to meet, and they set their first date for the very next day. Paul, armed with his charm, eloquence, and striking looks, not only showered her with compliments, but also took her to one of the city's finest restaurants. He left an indelible impression on Brittany, sweeping her off her feet on their very first meeting. She quickly envisioned him as the man of her dreams, possessing all the ideal qualities she desired, and she excitedly shared these sentiments with her best friend. However, Paul saw Brittany not as a partner, but as a prestigious trophy to enhance his own self-esteem. She was not only strikingly beautiful, but also a popular television personality with promising career prospects. Determined not to lose her, Paul fabricated a story about needing to handle urgent business in Australia to finalize his divorce, with plans to return to the States promptly and propose to Brittany. Samantha was startled by Paul's sudden visit and his now urgent push to dissolve their marriage, especially after his previous refusals. Yet, by early 2015, without formally ending their marriage, Paul rushed back to Florida, driven by a compulsion to keep Brittany under his surveillance. When Brittany inadvertently learned about the true purpose of Paul's trip to Australia, she was dismayed and contemplated ending their relationship, feeling complicit in the destruction of his marriage. However, Paul skillfully reassured her, claiming that he and his wife had long been separated and had mutually agreed to divorce, needing only to finalize a few legal matters. Upon his return, Paul wasted no time meeting Brittany, sharing a fabricated tale of his dismal first marriage and his quest for genuine love. His portrayal was so convincing that within a week, they decided to move in together, albeit under certain conditions. Brittany established a 3-month trial period to determine their true compatibility, humorously referring to their arrangement as Beauty and the Beast. But it took only a month for Paul to unveil his true nature, turning Brittany's life into a living nightmare. He began to regard her as his property, believing he had the right to control her every move. His behavior grew increasingly erratic, as if he were grappling with multiple conflicting personalities that he couldn't rein in. Realizing the gravity of her situation, Brittany swiftly recognized the dire need to escape the relationship. Paul reacted to Brittany's departure with escalating desperation. He accused her of ruining his life, reminding her of the sacrifices he claimed to have made for her, including divorcing his wife and relocating halfway across the world. Despite his pleas, Brittany packed her belongings and moved to a new apartment in an attempt to distance herself from the volatile relationship. However, Paul's behavior quickly intensified into outright stalking. He bombarded Brittany with relentless messages, calls from various numbers, and emails while physically trailing her everywhere she went. His communication swung wildly between professions of love and forgiveness to ominous threats of self-harm or harm against her. A few weeks into this harassment, Paul shifted strategies. With a quivering voice, he phoned Brittany, claiming his father had passed away and he was alone in the U.S. with no one else to turn to. Moved by what seemed like genuine distress, Brittany, ever empathetic and kind-hearted, agreed to meet him, hoping to offer support during what she believed was a sincere moment of need. Leveraging her sympathy, Paul managed to maintain a semblance of connection, manipulating her emotions to draw her back in, yet he could not sustain the facade. Soon, his behavior turned aggressive and erratic again, terrifying Brittany. When she tried to end their relationship definitively, Paul responded with dramatic threats of self-harm, claiming he couldn't endure another separation. Trapped by fear and confusion, Brittany suggested he seek psychiatric help. In response, Paul disclosed a fabricated diagnosis of an inoperable brain tumor, attributing his irrational behavior to the illness and claiming it was terminal. He tearfully persuaded her to promise not to abandon him while he was still alive. The following month and a half became an excruciating ordeal for the popular TV host. Paul's incessant disturbances followed her relentlessly, from home to the workplace. Brittany's mental health deteriorated rapidly. She suffered from sleep deprivation, anxiety, and frequent panic attacks that threatened not only her well-being, but also her career. Driven to desperation by the unrelenting chaos, Brittany eventually sought refuge by fleeing to a friend's house, hoping to find a sanctuary where Paul could not reach her. Paul's relentless pursuit took a darker turn when he began threatening Brittany with the release of intimate photos and a video he had secretly recorded. This final breach compelled Brittany to take action. She reported him to the police and informed him of her actions. In July 2015, the court issued a restraining order prohibiting Paul from approaching or contacting her in any manner. Despite the legal constraints, Paul continued his torment, sending threatening messages, attempting blackmail, and shadowing her movements. In October of the same year, his actions led to his deportation from the United States, permanently barring him from re-entry. Brittany finally felt a measure of peace. Returning to Australia, Paul adopted his mother's maiden name, Lambert, to distance himself from his criminal past. He then set his sights on reconciling with Samantha, his estranged wife, unaware that the marriage dissolution had not been finalized. Samantha was alarmed by Paul's return and sought police intervention to ensure her safety and expedite the divorce proceedings. In a dramatic twist, in February 2016, Paul contacted Samantha, deceitfully agreeing to finalize their divorce. He persuaded her to meet with a lawyer to discuss details, and against her better judgment, she agreed, hopeful for closure. The meeting quickly escalated into a nightmare. As they drove away from her home, Paul pleaded with her to reconsider the divorce. When she refused, he resorted to insults and chilling threats, vowing to crash the car to ensure their mutual demise. He sped towards an oncoming truck, but Samantha managed to divert the vehicle off the road at the last moment. In the aftermath, Paul assaulted her, but she escaped from the car and sought help. Samantha pressed charges for kidnapping, bodily harm, and attempted murder. Paul was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 10 months in prison. The court also expedited the dissolution of their marriage and issued a permanent restraining order against him. Surprisingly, Paul was released on parole after just a month with a 1-year probationary period. Moving to another state, Paul rented a house and secured employment, cleverly avoiding notification to the authorities. He continued to check in with his probation officer by flying to the required location, maintaining the illusion of compliance. During this period, mandated psychiatric evaluations revealed deeper psychological issues than previously diagnosed. Despite being prescribed medication, Paul neglected his treatment, persisting in his deceptive and destructive patterns. Despite attending the court-mandated therapy sessions, Paul ultimately dismissed the specialist's assistance, paving the way for another disturbing episode. Shortly after his parole, he created a new profile on a dating site and soon connected with Angela J., a 28-year-old doctor. Angela, with her strikingly angelic features, graceful, blue-eyed, and blonde, sporting a dazzling smile and a flawless figure, was precisely his type. Recently divorced, she was seeking support and understanding, but instead, she found someone who nearly destroyed her. Paul initially unleashed his charm to ensnare Angela, showering her with compliments and crafting dates that showcased his seemingly attentive, understanding, and sympathetic nature. However, about a month into their relationship, the facade began to crumble as his behavior turned increasingly obsessive. He secretly made a copy of her house key and visited her home while she was at work. When Angela discovered these intrusions, she decided to end the relationship, which triggered Paul's most menacing behaviors. Paul vacillated between desperate pleas for forgiveness and chilling threats of self-harm. When these tactics failed to sway Angela, he resorted to intimidation. Eventually, he feigned a need for medical help, leveraging Angela's professional compassion to maintain a connection. She reluctantly agreed to assist him in finding psychiatric care and to oversee his treatment, a decision that seemed to momentarily placate him. Yet, Paul's behavior grew increasingly erratic and threatening. He stole Angela's documents and coerced her to accompany him, claiming he would only return them if she complied. Realizing the gravity of her peril, Angela managed to inform her sister, who quickly contacted the police. Paul returned the documents under police pressure, but was merely warned and released. That very day, fueled by rage and unthwarted in his intent, Paul visited a hardware store and purchased a large kitchen knife, duct tape, and lighter fluid. He then rented a nondescript vehicle and drove to Angela's residence, intent on forcing entry. However, his plans were thwarted as Angela, anticipating further trouble, had changed the locks. Paul waited for Angela's return from work, hiding near her front door. At the last moment, Angela spotted her stalker, dashed inside, locked herself in, and called the police. Although the officers arrived swiftly, Paul had already fled the scene. Undeterred, he returned a week later on November 3rd, armed with a crowbar to break into Angela's home through the back door while she was at work. Upon her return, Angela barely stepped inside before experiencing a sharp pain in her shoulder. Paul, lurking inside, attacked her, knocking her down and stabbing her repeatedly across her chest, neck, and arms. As she fought for her life, Paul doused her with lighter fluid and attempted to ignite it, but fortunately, his lighter malfunctioned. Throughout this horrific ordeal, Angela's screams alerted a nearby neighbor who courageously intervened, wielding a makeshift weapon to drive Paul away, and immediately called for medical help, staunching her wounds until the ambulance arrived. Despite her grave injuries and significant blood loss, Angela survived the assault. Astonishingly, Paul continued to harass her with calls and messages even as she recuperated in the hospital. He oscillated between apologies and threats, blaming his actions on an alleged alter ego and vowing revenge. He sent similar disturbing messages to his mother, his ex-wife Samantha, and Angela's parents. The following day, Paul contacted the police, confessing to his inner turmoil and attributing the violence to other personalities within him. When offered a chance to surrender, he declared he'd rather die and abruptly ended the call. However, the police traced his location and pursued him along a highway on the east coast of Australia. As officers attempted to intercept him, they deployed spikes to halt his vehicle. Undeterred, Paul leaped from his car, brandishing a large knife and threatening the police. When he charged at an officer, the police were compelled to open fire. Initially unfazed by a single shot, Paul continued his advance until further shots were fired, ultimately bringing him down. It was a tragic end, but seemingly the only resolution to his relentless madness.